All right, so we got 10 minutes. We'll talk about the midterms, because I just think it's really important for you to understand what's happening in Washington, why it's happening, and not to read too much, but also not to miss things as they come about. Most important thing to understand when it comes to the midterms is that the midterms are decided in the House in particular on the president's approval rating. Because that one number, if you see what President Trump's approval rating is, or any president's approval rating, that pretty much takes everything into account. That takes into account the economy. It takes into account how people view how their consumer confidence is. It's how the U.S.'s standing is in the world. It's what happens in domestic politics. And if a president's approval rating is below 50 and is certainly around 40, their party loses seats in the House. It happens every time because the House, with 435 elections all simultaneously, very hard for one House member to break away from their party. It can happen, but it as a rule, it doesn't. And so as you can see, where President Trump's approval rating tracking to be 37%, come November, he would lose his party would lose a, relatively speaking, massive number of seats. We're talking, a couple dozen, maybe even 3 dozen or so. And this year is very much shaping up like that 2006 election, where the Republicans lost both the House and the Senate. In 2006, it was a lot about Iraq. And in 2024 or 26, 20 years later, it could be a lot about Iran. The Iran war is very unpopular in the United States, just like the Iraq war was. And we could talk about why if you want later on. So we go into this thinking that in the House, for sure, the Democrats are going to take over. Now, the Senate is different because unlike the 435 seats up in the House, the Senate has about 30 seats up. And each state maybe has one, not even every state, but some states have 1 seat up. And so the senators can have an identity separate from the president easier than a House member can. So what we really need to watch is what's happening in very particular Senate races. Who's up? How do they stand? How does that state feel about the president? And the Democrats will need to win 4 or they need to win 5 seats to take the majority, because a tie goes to the Republicans because they have the White House. So the Democrats need to get to 51 seats. And one of the interesting things to watch is how Trump's trade policy and how his attacks, figurative, of course, not literal yet, figurative attacks on Canada have turned out through tariffs, through the USMCA negotiation, how he refers to Prime Minister Carney, how he refers to the country. Because there are 8 states that have Senate elections, 7 of them directly border Canada. One of them, Iowa, is close to Canada and has a large amount of its agricultural exports go to Canada. So it is very exposed to the Canadian economy. So these 8 states are really important to watch because this is where the president's trade policy could impact a Senate election. This almost never happens. Usually U.S. elections are solely based on domestic. But this one can be different. So if you look at where the president's approval rating is, if you look at where the Senate races are, you would say in U.S. election terms, a blue wave is coming. So typically blue is Democrat, red is Republican, and this blue wave can be coming to take over the Capitol, like in 2006, where the Democrats get the House and the Senate. Now, why that may not happen. One of the things that this administration is focused on is potentially election interference. Could the Republicans and Trump and the executive branch do things that would change the rules? Will they put ICE agents at polling places? If they do, that could keep people from voting who might not have otherwise? Can they declare postal votes invalid? If they did that, that could change how the election came out. So there are still things that can be done that could change the election because the rules aren't what they had always been in the past. So that's one thing to watch. Another thing to watch is the manosphere. Everyone know what the manosphere is? We'll do a longer talk on the manosphere next time. But the manosphere basically is where you have, it is a part of the internet that is very much focused on young men. And it is very, frankly, misogynistic. It tends to be anti-Semitic. And it's a lot of voters who are what we in the U.S. would call low propensity voters, people who don't often vote, yet they can be very influenced to go out and vote by what is referred to as the manosphere and by the leaders of the manosphere. So Kamala Harris in 2024 said she lost men to the manosphere. And the Republicans and MAGA are doing the same exact thing again. There are very serious policy goals behind the manosphere. Get rid of no-fault divorce, so make it more difficult for women to get a divorce from their husband. Do things to promote a family through tax law, and DEI. All of these things are policy goals that you have in the manosphere. And we see this playing out when they talk about a Senate candidate in Texas who very much could bring an upset, not will, but could bring an upset to Texas, a very red state. So how are they describing this Democrat, James Talrico? They say masculine would be one of the words I would never use to describe him. Stephen Miller in the White House after Talrico won said he would become the first transgender Senate candidate. He's not transgendered, but those are the types of attacks to watch. So one of the interesting things, if you're going to watch this election play out, is that there are ways that the Republicans can hold on, even though it looks like a blue wave is coming. And so what are the other issue really impacting U.S. politics and geopolitics is AI. I asked Noemi, who works with me, I said, come up with a slide to show a data center near a neighborhood and why there is such a backlash against data centers. And so Noemi put the slide together. And I said, well, no, don't use AI to generate the slide. Get a real photo of a data center near a neighborhood. She said, no, that's a real photo. That's in Virginia. And this is why there is such a backlash against data centers, because people don't want them near them. They drive up electricity costs. They use up water. They're, relatively speaking, loud. And they take away farmland or parkland, and they don't really bring jobs and economic benefit to those areas. So there is such a backlash against AI in the U.S. Right now. And Americans are viewing data centers as mostly bad or neither good nor bad. And this is from January, so I'm sure the numbers are way worse now when it comes to the environment, when it comes to energy costs, when it comes to quality of life nearby. Those are the issues of why AI is bringing such a backlash. Part of it is because of the data centers as the manifestation to that AI. And data centers at the ballot box are hurting people who have approved those data centers. It led to Democratic wins in Virginia, New Jersey, and Georgia. Wisconsin's revolting against them. Missouri's revolting against them. So this is a real issue to watch. Can Democrats or Republicans get the edge when it comes to AI in the midterms? The other issue that we have with AI is it leads to a K-shaped economy. At least it certainly is right now, because all of the economic gains are going to a small part of society. Those who are in the jobs that can take advantage of AI. Those who are in jobs that lost because of AI, they're losing. And A K-shaped economy cannot exist for a long period of time. There is going to be a rebellion if you have a K-shaped economy. And this is what those who are concerned about AI are focused on, both in the elections and in Washington, and should be in geopolitics as well. So this is an op-ed that Noemi and I and our colleague Megan wrote in November for Eco-Business. And we said, businesses better be ready, because as these ESG risks mount from AI and the environment on business, on society, there is going to be a backlash. And this is what Prime Minister Trudeau, I should say former Prime Minister Trudeau, said in Singapore a month or two ago, that if the wealth is not felt by all, we are going to have a revolution if we are not responsible. So what is Washington trying to do right now? They are putting controls, right, on AI. And the question will be, is the controls that Washington is putting on AI, will they be as effective as the cleanup of the reflecting pool has been under the Trump administration? Or is this just going to be very difficult to control? But if you're sitting here in Singapore and you're using a system that the U.S. then bans, what position is that going to put you in? And what our government's going to do about that? And our government's here going to do the same thing the United States does. So there is a great deal of sovereign risk when it comes to AI. And so what we have been working with on businesses and investors, and we think government should be doing the same, is having some type of AI risk scenario analysis. As you have your AI policy as a business, yes, you can think that whatever you're doing today is going to be the same going forward when it comes to your access to AI, that it's going to be limitless and it's going to be affordable. But there's a second scenario where AI is available, but it is expensive. And those costs are going to go up because of sole sourcing risk, could electricity prices, could be of a lack of data centers and too much demand and not enough supply, or what happens if AI becomes rationed or sovereign. So these are the types of risks that are out there for AI. It's what politicians should be thinking about, and it is what governments should be thinking about, and it